believe Douglas Feith, and a number of the people who are lately involved in this Israeli spy scandal. So David Wormser is another one. So that these, you know, the neocons, we refer to them, actually gave advice to Sharon and also pretty much the same people in the Project for the New American Century.
Paul, what about 9/11? Why is anyone doubting it? Weren't all the real questions cleared up by the 9/11 Commission?
We can see so many instances of conflicts of interest. For instance, Philip Zelikow, who is the executive director, and he was the person who is in charge of figuring out who the witnesses are going to be, where the evidence, and what evidence they were going to look at. He co-wrote a book with Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor, and has so many ties with the Bush administration. He was part of the transition team, so he actually had to be interviewed by his own commission because he himself was involved in so much of what went on before 9/11. And all of the commissioners are very compromised by conflicts of interest. Quite a few of them are working with legal teams that represent United Airlines or American Airlines. I think half the commissioners. So that's one problem. Another problem is that the final report was supposed to be a unanimous report. So that means that if there was a single commissioner who had any objection about anything, that fact would be dropped from the report. So there is literally nothing in the 9/11 report that the Bush administration did not approve of.
The number of omissions is staggering. For example, they begin the book with a discussion of the hijackers, giving the same 19 that have been named from the beginning. They fail to point out that 6 of those hijackers have shown up alive. They also discuss Muhammad Atta, describing him as a fanatic Muslim, obviously so devout he was ready to meet his maker. They omit the fact, as Daniel Hupsicker has revealed, that Atta was very fond of alcohol, pork, and lap dances. They hardly discuss the World Trade Center collapses. They do not discuss the fact that fire has never brought down a high-rise steel frame building. They do not discuss the fact that the collapses had 10 characteristics that are common to controlled demolitions. They do not even mention the collapse of building number 7, and of course, therefore, the comment by Larry Silverstein, the one who had a lease on it, that he and the fire department decided to pull it, that is, have it brought down by explosives. They do not discuss the removal of the steel, which would have covered up any evidence of explosives. With regard to the crash into the Pentagon, they ignore several of the most puzzling questions, assuming the official theory. That is, why would terrorists have struck the West Wing, which was being renovated, so it had very few people, and when all the top brass and Rumsfeld were in the East Wing? They do not discuss the fact that photos taken by the Associated Press and even by a Marine show that up till 30 minutes after the building was allegedly hit by a 757 going 400 some miles an hour, the facade had not collapsed. They don't discuss the fact that these photos show that the hole that was created was very tiny, that no Boeing could have gone inside of it. They don't mention that photos show there was no Boeing outside the Pentagon. They don't mention that the Pentagon's anti-missile system should have brought down any commercial airline coming near the Pentagon. With regard to Bush's behavior that day, they do not force the question as to why the Secret Service did not whisk him away when there should have been fear that he would be one of the terrorist targets. They do not discuss the most specific of the advance warnings. They did not ask Ashcroft what was the warning he got so that he would no longer fly commercial airplanes. They do not mention David Schipper's report that prior to 9/11, he tried to inform Ashcroft that several members of the FBI were telling him that they knew that attacks were scheduled for that time in Lower Manhattan. They do discuss the put options, but they dismiss it, saying, "We found that the man who bought most of the United Airlines put options had no conceivable connection to Al-Qaeda. Therefore, he could have had no foreknowledge." This is a perfect example of how the official theory dictated what evidence was relevant. With regard to the claim that we were hunting bin Laden prior to 9/11, the Commission fails to mention that he reportedly showed up in July before 9/11 in a hospital in Dubai, where he was treated by an American doctor, visited by the local CIA agent, and the head of Saudi intelligence. They ignore the testimony of Abu Zubaydah, the Al-Qaeda operative who reported that 3 members of the Saudi royal family had advanced knowledge that there would be attacks on America on 9/11, and that a Pakistani general also had this knowledge. Testimony that tended to be verified by the fact that all 4 of those men ended up dead within a few months. With regard to the Saudi flights that Michael Moore made well known in his movie, based on Craig Unger's book, the Commission claims there was nothing wrong with the flight on September 11th from Tampa to Lexington. American airspace had been opened. They leave out the crucial point which Unger had stressed, that American airspace had only been open for commercial aircraft, not for private. This seemed a particularly blatant attempt at deliberate deception. They ignored all the allegations that FBI headquarters had blocked investigations. They ignored Robert Wright's charges. They omitted the crucial element in the Colleen Rowley case, the Moussaoui case, and they omitted virtually every detail of Sibel Edmonds' 3.5-hour testimony. They omit any reference to the fact that the head of the Pakistani intelligence service was in Washington that very week, and that he had ordered $100,000 wired to Muhammad Atta. It ignores the Project for the New American Century, formed by many members that are now part of the Bush administration, with its explosive statement that a new Pearl Harbor would be very helpful. They ignore the fact that many members of the White House, including the President himself, after 9/11, described the attacks as opportunities. They ignore the fact that there were pre-existing plans for war in both Afghanistan and Iraq, and that both of these had to do primarily with oil. I've talked primarily about the Commission's omissions, but there is another remarkable dimension, the revisionism of this report. In Chapter 1, they give us a completely new version, which is actually the 3rd official version of what happened on 9/11. This version is clearly intended to absolve the Pentagon of all blame by portraying the FAA as staffed by incompetent bunglers, ones who couldn't recognize a hijacking when all 3 or 4 regular characteristics were staring them in the face. And then people at FAA headquarters who could not bring themselves to pick up the phone and call the military even after they knew of hijackings. This part should win a prize for creative fiction. In short, the 9/11 Commission report is a national disgrace. But what can we do? We cannot get on the mainstream media to make these truths known. Probably we need to organize massive protests, massive enough to force the mass media to pay attention. The first step in this, of course, is to get enough people informed about the facts about 9/11 and about the cover-up, so that we can create this mass movement. That, of course, is the importance of this event, and I'm pleased to have been a part of it.
You know, the plan to go to Iraq was in place right after Bush was inaugurated. And, you know, his cabinet tells you everything about what their interests are because they're all oil people. And essentially, the way that you have to look at the Middle East via this lens of the plan for a new American century is this. You have to look at Jordan, and I'm going to make this very brief. Jordan is all the borders of Jordan are oil pipeline rights of way. Gulf states, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, etc., those are oil reservoirs. And Israel, Syria, and Lebanon, those are pipeline terminals. So if you look at it that way, you can see, and you know, all indications right now is that we're headed for Iran. So if you look at it just as I've described it, you really get a sense of why this was so important for them to do, even, you know, even on the back of this horrific tragedy.
It has been astonishing, as I imagine many of you agree, that since 9/11, it has taken 3 years just to even get a baseline establishment of what the government's position is on what happened. For the first year or two, we didn't even hear answers to what happened, when, and how. Now things are finally trickling out due to the commitment of, say, widows and other relatives of those who were killed on 9/11. So we have an administration which has shown itself to be incredibly opportunistic and unwilling to open the door to discussion about how they acted before and during 9/11, which means that many, many people, like Paul Thompson and others, have had to do all this legwork themselves. And the media has been rather quiescent. I personally am a skeptic of many of the things that we're going to see here tonight. I think that a lot more has to be done to ascertain what it is. And I don't think you have to go so far as to establish that this was a manufactured event. But clearly what we know already is bad enough. What we know is that the system of security and counterterrorism was blinking red, in the words of George Tenet, that the warnings of an imminent attack were so severe that something dramatic should have been done. It was unparalleled. Instead, our president went on a month-long vacation. And so we know that there was a blind eye turned to the warnings. We also know that in the event of 9/11, the government was incredibly opportunistic, that these same guys who were in PNAC, who were in the American Enterprise Institute, and who were strewn throughout the top level of the government, quickly, within hours, seized on this event to push their pet obsession of invading Iraq, which, as most of you probably know by now, did not have weapons of mass destruction, was not a threat to us, did nothing to do with 9/11. And I'll just end by saying that 42% of Americans in a poll taken this week still believe that Iraq had something to do with 9/11. So that means that we have our work cut out for us to talk to that 42% and say, where is your head? What are you thinking? Can you read this? Can you look at this? Can you think about this again? Because I imagine that all of you are here and this conference is happening because of the internet. 20, 30 years ago, you could not have had this level of response to an event like this without the media taking part. You guys are all part of the media now, and you can all have enormous power by using that and talking to people.
The other night, we had a similar meeting, and there was a discussion about the dire situation with oil. We're running out of supplies. I want to know if the people on this panel think that there's a solution, since we're so dependent on oil.
One of the most patriotic things we can do is to lessen our dependence on Mideast oil and stop funding these people. It's a very direct line these dollars take to go to people who want to do us harm around the world. And a hybrid vehicle that cost me $95 from LA to Pittsburgh, you can't buy a Greyhound ticket for $95 LA to Pittsburgh. It gets 60 miles per gallon. I have an electric car. I drive around LA that's charged by the sun. I've owned a windmill since 1985, putting out many homes worth of clean power. So these technologies exist. It's just another way of doing things. And guess what? There's jobs making hybrid cars and solar panels and electric cars and all those things too. And good jobs. And jobs of dignity. Now, Paul, can you wrap it up, bring us home, please, and tell a little bit, did the 9/11 Commission answer everything for you?
At least a dozen countries tried to warn the United States. Israel, Egypt, Germany, France, Argentina, Morocco. The list is quite long. And there isn't a single mention of any of those warnings from foreign governments in the 9/11 Commission report, even though these were reported by the New York Times, Washington Post. So you can see that even in some of the most basic facts are not in the 9/11 Commission's report. So we cannot trust the report, in my opinion, really whatsoever.
There have been a great number of omissions. In fact, more than we have time for. We're about to look up a few of the big ones. You may recognize the 9/11 Commission report. I'm going to read you perhaps its most astounding confession on page 172. The U.S. government has not been able to determine the origin of the money used for the 9/11 attacks. Ultimately, the question is of little practical significance. Isn't that interesting? Doesn't it matter who paid for 9/11? It also says, the 9/11 Commission report, similarly, we have seen no evidence that any foreign government or foreign government official supplied any funding. And I think we've discovered rule 1 of the 9/11 Commission: don't follow the money. Dr. Bob Bowman.
What was going through the President's mind gets to the very important question that Jenna asked earlier about culpability and what do we believe, and was this just something that dropped into their laps or whatever. We have, in attempting to answer this, we have 3 different kinds of information. I'm not going to go into them. You've been exposed to a lot of them tonight and will be to more of them. A lot of these pieces of information taken together prove that the official story, the official conspiracy theory of 9/11 is a bunch of hogwash. It's impossible. But they don't prove what really happened and who was responsible. But there's a second group of facts having to do with the cover-up. And, you know, these are a whole bunch of things like the confiscation of the surveillance tapes of the impact on the Pentagon, the confiscation of the air traffic control voice tapes. It goes on and on and on. Taken together, these things prove that high levels of our government don't want us to know what happened and who is responsible. And then there's a third set of facts that impinges on the President's thinking and all of that. These are the facts of what happened after 9/11, and this is a historical record. For example, Ashcroft and his cronies got their Patriot Act, which takes away our civil liberties and trashes the Bill of Rights. UNICAL got its invasion of Afghanistan and secured a route for oil and gas pipeline for $1 trillion worth of gas from the Caspian Sea to the Indian Ocean. Cheney's Halliburton got no-bid contracts to support the troops in destroying Iraq and other contracts to rebuild it. And more importantly, all those PNAC guys, the neocons, got their invasion of Iraq. They got regime change in Iraq. So the questions come, who gained from 9/11? Who covered up crucial information about 9/11? And who put out the patently false stories about 9/11 in the first place? When you take those three things together, I think the case is pretty clear that it's highly placed individuals in the administration with all roads passing through Dick Cheney. I think the very kindest thing that we can say about George W. Bush and all the people in the U.S. government that have been involved in this massive cover-up, the very kindest thing we can say is that they were aware of the impending attacks and let them happen. Now, some people will say that's much too kind. However, even that is high treason and conspiracy to commit murder. When we talk about the rest of this stuff, there's one thing I want us to keep in mind. If enough of the American people are stupid enough and manipulated enough to re-elect this gang of thugs, then we, the true American patriots, will have no recourse but to continue pushing for a real investigation, perhaps by the Attorney General of New York City, who knows? An investigation telling the truth and leading to the indictment of these people. Their conviction, their removal from office, and their incarceration for a very long period of time.
We're going to return to our panel to discuss these issues, whether or not 9/11 was unavoidable. Still, we wonder, after such a supported and supposed failure, shouldn't anyone be held accountable? First of all, I want to introduce John Prados. He's a journalist and an author. His work appears regularly in one of the nation's great old journals on military affairs, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. Welcome, John.
Carl Schwartz is a principal in global access and a former high-level consultant to the Republican Party. Arkansas Republicans once asked him to run for governor against Bill Clinton, and more recently, he's been researching the background reasons for the removal of the Taliban. Carl Schwartz.
Welcome, Carl. Mr. Prados, who, if anyone in the government, should be held accountable for 9/11?
Who's to be held accountable? I think it's pretty clear. The President of the United States, George W. Bush, who failed to exert leadership at a key moment in the nation's history. The Vice President of the United States, Richard Cheney, who was in charge of a committee to deal with the terrorism issue and wouldn't meet with it before September 11th happened. Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft, who cut money out of the terrorism budget the day before September 11th. The National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, and her deputy, Stephen Hadley, who held back the plan to do anything about al-Qaeda for 9 months during the months that something could have been happened. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, which muffed its investigation of what was going on in terrorist circles in the United States. The Central Intelligence Agency, who failed to appreciate everything that was going on, even though George Tenet was running around with his hair on fire. There's a lot more I could talk about, but I think we've got little time here, so I'm going to pass it along.
There's somebody I want to hear from, and thank you, John. That was quite eloquent. You know, not only was the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act signed under President Nixon, but a lot of the recent environmental laws passed we couldn't have done without Sherry Boehlert and John Chafee, now deceased, and Lincoln Chafee, and wonderful Republicans who've stood up in the environment. We have a Republican here tonight who's here to prove this is and should be a nonpartisan issue. I'd like to hear from Carl Schwartz, please. Carl.
Every time I hear the name Ashcroft, I have to remind myself this was a guy that lost an election in a gubernatorial in the Show-Me state to a dead guy. And then his next job is to come before every one of us and treat us all as an al-Qaeda suspect. So I am not real proud to call myself a Republican these days. I tell the simple story that I became a Republican in 1980 because of Bill and Hillary Clinton, and I became an independent recently because of George Bush. There have been several things said this evening. These are just factual, correcting things. We talked about this backstage. Because of the media and the timeline and how people put all this together, the doctor brought up Unocal a minute ago. Unocal is actually owned by the Venezuelan government-owned Petroleus. They are not a U.S.-owned company anymore. If you know anything about the pegging of the dollar to oil and the pegging of the dollar to the euro, there's only two companies on the face of this planet that have done that. One is Iraq. You can see what happened to them. And the other one was Venezuela. And you can pretty well come to a conclusion there's been quite a bit of interference in Venezuela as to what to do about their pegging to the dollar. We've tried to stomp Chavez to death politically down there. To address Sibel Evans that came up in the clip a minute ago, I interviewed Sibel Evans for a book that I wrote, and everybody thinks it's got a cute name to it, and I didn't even name it. It's titled One-Way Ticket to Crawford, Texas. A conservative Republican speaks out. Where my story started in this actually started in 1999. I left Wall Street. I've been in this city many, many times. In fact, I've been in the World Trade Center many, many times. I used to office with Pre-Base Capital Markets at 100 Gold Street. Then we all moved with Smith Barney, and we went up here at 1345 Avenue of the Americas. And when Smith Barney moved down to Greenwich, 380 Greenwich, that's when I left the company and preferred to do something else with my life other than travel 500,000 to 1 million miles a year. But one of the things that I did was I went with UUNet. I saw telecom and AP-centrics as something that was interesting. Possibly profitable if you did it right. And I met a company in November of 1999 at a telecom conference. In the book, The Forbidden Truth, there's the Broussard book, Bin Laden, The Forbidden Truth. They disclosed that Brightest Corporation, excuse me, had actually signed a contract with Turkmenistan and with Pakistan to build the Trans-Afghanistan pipeline. Now, they were not able to ferret out the information I was, and I did this face-to-face. Excuse me, I am having problems with my voice. What we found is that the Brightest also had a contract with the Taliban and with General Rashid Dostum. The last remaining obstacle after our government and after our influence peddlers had put enough pressure on Turkmenistan to upend that government's agreements with Brightest. They also upended Pakistan. There's a good possibility when Bhutto was overturned, we may have been behind it. We have a lot of companies over there, including 4 that have electrical generation power plants in Pakistan right now, and they've had them since the mid-1990s. They wanted and need cheap natural gas to make those projects feasible. Now, some of you may have heard about the Enron Dabol fiasco in Dabol, India. That is not a feasible project because of the cost of the natural gas is too high. They proceeded anyway. We lost $1 billion in U.S. government guarantees. But the thing that stuck out to me the most is we found that this is a bipartisan problem. It's on both sides of the aisle, and that's why I finally decided to stand up and tell everything I knew. We actually know that there are we were actually putting RICO lawsuits together to go after certain parties, not about 9/11. Our research had nothing to do with 9/11. It had to do with international securities fraud. It had to do with telecom fraud. Because of an interview that I heard on the radio one time, that led me to Sibel Edmonds. I'm not under a gag order. I wanted to compare names. I wanted to compare trails, what we call rabbit trails. When you're investigating, These people will throw everything out in front of you they can to keep from getting caught. Sometimes you have to wade through 10, 15, or 20 shell corporations just to find out who the true owner of something is. And what we found was the same thing she found. And she confirmed it in a conversation with me just about the time they were putting the lid on her. She found drug trafficking, money laundering, she found foreign names, and she found American names in the financing of 9/11. Now, what she found had nothing to do with counterterrorism. I even quote in my book, sometimes it pays, Dick, did you check your 6? Did you check at 3, 9, and 12 to see if they were sitting right across the table or standing right next to you? What they found inside the FBI actually came from ongoing drug investigations dating back to 1998. And I heard the other day, just a minute ago, Mr. Thompson brought up Argentina. The company that had the contract with the Taliban is Brightest Corporation. They are from Argentina. On September 9, 2003, they won a lawsuit in our Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They had been tied up in the Texas courts since 1996. They won $500 million in a judgment for interference of contract in Turkmenistan. The only remaining thing was to take the Taliban and Brightest out. And then we control it all. We control the Caspian Basin oil. We have the pipeline to get it to the sea. The oil and gas in the Caspian Basin in current dollars is worth somewhere between 11 and 12 trillion dollars. If you look at who was on the 9/11 Commission, on the Democrat side, who was directly benefiting, Mr. Ben Venice law firm was the law firm that kept Brightest tied up. They're also the law firm that lost the lawsuit when it went to the Supreme Court and the Fifth Circuit. They kept them tied up at least from 1998. They're involved in Pakistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan in about 20 different ways. You got the guy Thompson, the Republican governor, former governor of Illinois. He is sitting on the board of FMC. They have an oil and gas subsidiary. They make equipment. They're selling a lot of it overseas in the Caspian. Jamie Gorelick, I thought she was going to be a go-getter. I mean, I was rooting for her because she acted like she knew what she was doing. She sits on the board of Schlumberger, which is a competitor to Halliburton. Just within 2 weeks prior to the 9/11 Commission saying Sinai died and handing it over to the President and Congress to change our rights some more, which is what I think they plan to do, Schlumberger finally comes forward and admits they're having record profits in this last quarter, and they're doing a lot of big bucks business in the Caspian Basin. If you look at the reality that Brightest had a contract with the Taliban, we had landlocked oil and gas deals. We had to get it to the ocean. We had people actually doing business in Pakistan. You literally have to look at 9/11 and all of those foregoing issues as inseparable. There is your Pearl Harbor. And that our government can sit there and contrive policy like this. I came up with 4 words in this book. One was hopelessness. I see it all over this country, and I've seen it for a long time. The second word that came up to my mind was the indifference of our government. When you were speaking about the EPA, they can literally change reality because they're afraid it may affect something. And their policy does not have anything to do with quality of life or life. If it snuffs your life out economically or health-wise, so be it, if they think it's good policy. And it's both sides of the aisle in D.C. I call them financial terrorists. I don't know what you would call them.
I'd like to ask the first question to Webster Tarpley. Can you talk about the likely role of the neoconservatives, the civilians inside the Pentagon, in perpetrating 9/11? And if you like, can you comment on their likely response to a successful 9/11 movement that might put in jeopardy their hold on power this November?
When Bush ran for office, he ran, frankly, as a moron who would be a moron, but he would get the best advisors. So it's to the advisors that we have to look. And if we look at a Cheney or a Wolfowitz or some of these other people, here we see people that may very well be the conduits of the rogue network into the White House. But make no mistake, it is that rogue network which has been running the United States. Now, if I say rogue network, it may make them seem a little bit too lonely, and I don't think they're lonely. People who are old enough to remember the Iran-Contra years can remember words like the invisible government, the parallel government, the secret government, the shadow government. Senator Inouye said they had their own Army, Navy, Air Force, Treasury, their own policies, their own ways of making decisions. That invisible government, that secret government, I submit, is alive and well. The neocons are certainly a part of it. I call them neocon fascist madmen. But it's deeper. It's deeper, in my view. It's not just the neocons. The neocons have been part of this for perhaps 20 or 30 years, but it's something that's been around significantly longer. So I would say we have to look primarily at this network inside the U.S. government. Now, certainly other people provide auxiliaries. MI6 traditionally provides services. The Mossad obviously provides services. When we get down to something like Saudi intelligence or the ISI, again, these are a kind of walk-on parts in the middle of all this. But it seems to me that this is the thing that we have to confront. Now, this network is still in place. Nobody has laid a glove on them, much less this fake 9/11 commission with Kane and Hamilton.
We have to go on. We're running out of time.
Okay. So I would just say that's a group that's still there, and their reaction is most likely to be what they're doing right now. They're courting war with Iran, they're courting war with Syria, they're courting war with the Sudan, and most disturbing of all, they are courting war with Russia. Because according to President Putin and the Russian press right now, the people behind the massacre at that school in northern Ossetia are the United States government and the British government, and that's all over the Russian press.
Our last presenter for the evening is a very accomplished, award-winning Canadian journalist named Barry Zwicker, whose new film is called The Great Conspiracy, the 9/11 media special you never saw. Barry Zwicker.
Those who ignore history are condemned to repeat it, wrote Santayana. History is bunk, said Henry Ford. Of the two, I'm more with Ford. The problem with Santayana's thoughtful quote is that it assumes history is accessible enough to be ignored. The allure of Ford's seemingly anti-intellectual outburst is that it reminds us that history can be complete fiction. But I haven't been able to find anyone to quote on what seems to me to be the most significant point of all about history, namely that much, perhaps most, significant history is hidden. I.F. Stone wrote a book called The Hidden History of the Korean War. Daniel Burston wrote Hidden History, Exploring Our Secret Past. And I thank Jamie Hecht for that. He found that title on the internet today. Thank you, Jamie. Howard Zinn wrote essentially an alternative history, a lot of you know about, A People's History of the United States. And more recently, Michael Parenti wrote History as Mystery. But, yes, unfortunately, Michael Parenti, my friend, is very, very poor on 9/11. For some reason, like Noam Chomsky, he just can't seem to get his head around this. It's a mystery to me. But the most lethal hidden histories, pound for pound, are the false flag operations that Webster Tarpley mentioned. These are the state-sponsored or rogue network toxic deceptions in which an actual attack on one's own country is engineered for the purpose of mobilizing public opinion, usually behind the war agenda of the invisible government and the ruling deceivers. Now, these deceptions tend to be turning points of history, leading to terrible loss of life and even downward spirals for whole countries. The book, Great War Triggering Deceptions of All Time, is yet to be written. But when it is, it will be very thick and of utmost importance. And if it is written, I cannot think of an author more qualified and capable of writing it than Webster G. Tarpley. One more quote by an American cultural critic, Larry Ray. Again, thank you, Jamie. I couldn't remember the name, and Jamie found it. I didn't have access to the internet today. Jamie Ray wrote, "Anniversaries are reservoirs of sacred power." I saw this firsthand this morning at Ground Zero. But there is something more sacred than any commemorative occasion, and that is the search for truths about turning point events, specifically tonight, about the events of 9/11. You're owed at least 2 relevant examples of previous deceptions, and that's all there's time for. First, Pearl Harbor, the original outrage. Robert B. Stinnett's book, Day of Deceit, is, in my opinion, by far the most comprehensive work on the subject. A former U.S. naval officer, Stinnett invested 17 years in research, and he liberated 100,000 previously classified documents. To brutally summarize Day of Deceit, it proves, to my satisfaction at least, that for a year before Pearl Harbor, FDR had a plan, specifically an 8-point plan, to provoke the Japanese into attacking U.S. forces or facilities. He repeatedly emphasized that it must be the case that the Japanese fire the first shot, and what a shot it was. It required that a significant part of the U.S. fleet be made vulnerable, that those responsible for protecting that fleet have one or both hands tied behind their backs, that the Japanese remain unaware that all their codes right up through the high command had been broken, and broken good. The day before Pearl Harbor, according to the Gallup poll, just 16% of the U.S. public supported this country entering World War II. The day after Pearl Harbor, 1 million men volunteered to fight in that war. That stingingly effective deception, at least, was in service of adding another powerful ally to the struggle to defeat Nazi Germany. And I, for one, retroactively endorse that. But such an ethically warranted fraud, if I may use that phrase, is virtually a lone exception to the rule in this sordid category. Typical, on the other hand, was the supposed attack by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in early August 1964 on 2 U.S. destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin. And I believe this has been referred to earlier in the evening. That's a problem when you come last. The supposed attack on the U.S. destroyers Maddox and Turner Joy was a sham. Navy Commander James Stockdale, later who was Ross Perot's vice presidential candidate, was flying cover in the Tonkin Gulf that night. Our destroyers were firing at phantom targets, he wrote later. There was nothing there but black water and American firepower. Lyndon Johnson, nevertheless, went on TV to deceive the American people and the Congress. The result was overwhelming support for immediate passage of the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which was the sole legal basis for the Vietnam War, the loss of 3 million Vietnamese lives and 58,000 American ones, and creation of a schism in the U.S. body politic that continues to this day. Emblematic, and the media have been mentioned here without praise earlier this evening, and after 33 years as a media critic, I can't find any fault with that. Emblematic of media malfeasance and supine service of illegitimate power then and now, the New York Times, after LBJ's speech, editorialized that, quote, "The president went to the American people last night with the somber facts," unquote. The most somber fact is that if we, the people, cannot force today's top hidden history into the open, a cascade of calamitous events is very likely to ensue. And my main prayer is that I am wrong. Thank you.
You've been so patient. We've been talking up here a lot, showing a lot of information. We invite you now. We have roamers out there with microphones to get your questions for the panel. So you can put some tough questions, some questions of any sort that you like. We have people out there with microphones, and we're going to get people to ask a question.
Where exactly are Rice and Powell in this whole dance? I only heard one person say something about Condoleezza Rice, but also Colin Powell, and all this. So those two.
Powell did not want to go along with the program. And he was basically pressured to sell the war to sell the war on Iraq. He was in the White House at the time when post 9/11 they were trying to ride that terror wave into Iraq. There were a number of offices, and I'm sure many of you have heard of them. Within the administration, there was the White House Information Group with Condoleezza Rice and company, who were they were the messengers, and the messages were being formulated for them to send out at the same time to sell the war, and the images of the mushroom clouds. And then there was the Office of Special Plans for cherry-picking intelligence and putting it together in a way, again, that would sell disinformation to the American public. And part of the Office of Special Plans was also to put pressure on high-level people in the CIA, the NSA, and even Colin Powell not to go along with the program. But unfortunately, he buckled. And he's trying to get Bob Woodward to sort of write his mea culpa in a sense, but he was a big man in a tight spot, and he did not, I think, acquit himself very, very well. He didn't stand up and call a halt to the madness.
Rice took over as National Security Advisor with a different agenda. She's a Europeanist. She's an expert on the Soviet Union.